Somebody says I'm leaving the company and the leader's response is, okay, don't tell anyone. We have to figure out how to explain this. I really think that when there's nothing that you're working hard to hide, then you have the opportunity to establish communication and conversations on subjects that are really broad and varying. So I try to be radically transparent in how we run our business.
Hello, and welcome to the Mind Your Leadership podcast. I am Karen Zook, and today I'm excited to introduce Claire Milligan with a BA in psychology, an MA in communication from Stanford, and through a journey spanning marketing, UX, and leadership roles at tech companies, Claire excels in tackling complex problems and creating innovative solutions. Now as the CEO of startup Aimably, she's applying her unique superpowers to help businesses grow by spending smarter and dramatically reducing their cloud costs. She also deeply committed to equity and supporting future leaders. In this episode, we will explore Claire's recipe for better conflict resolution. So stay with us. Claire, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm so pleased to be here with you, Karen, as well.
Claire, so it's a great to have you on the show, and I will be happy to start by asking you a question about your personal journey, and if you can tell us about your background and what led you to become the CEO of Aimably. And correct me if I'm not pronouncing it right, I think.
No problem. My journey to becoming CEO of Aimably was one of a bit of a bumpy road, but one that followed a course of growth of investors. So I got started in the tech world. I went to school in San Francisco in that area, and I got started in the tech world pretty quickly out of school. And I found that I really loved a lot of different disciplines and came through. But when the company I was working for was bought by private equity, I was leading design and helping with the engineering team. And through the process of being bought by private equity and being acquired in and merged with by the end, it was something like 8 or 9 former competitors, I really understood and got to know deeply not only the business strategy and the financial focus of private equity in order to be super successful, but also the soft skills that really took to get there and to bring people along and educate and support. And so by the time I left, I was running the business that had been acquired that I had been working for. And I was really challenged by understanding how to transform our cloud cost spending and knowing that it wasn't something that I could devote my whole attention to while I was at that company. I ended up leaving and starting a company with a former colleague of mine in order to be able to do that and to help other companies. Because honestly, with a tech company, your largest line item of expense is people, but the second one is your cloud bill from AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. So it's a pretty challenging problem to solve, and I've been enjoying doing it.
That's good. How long is the company?
I've been working with Mark at Aimably since December 2020. So we're still a little new, but enough seasoned.
Mm-hmm. And you have your own recipe for conflict resolution. Can you share with us about your unique strategy for conflict resolution and how did you develop this unique approach?
Yeah, a lot of it is based on the concept of difficult conversations from that book and also from the Harvard team. But essentially, what I understand about conflict is that nobody starts the day. They don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to have a fight with John down there at the desk. They start the day wanting to have a great day, and everybody does that. So when we have conflict, a lot of the time is not that, somebody's dumb and somebody's smart, but it's about the sets of information that we have. And so when my set of information that's informing my very strong opinion and my passionate opinion is a different set of information than the one that you have that's forming your different, very passionate opinion, the most important thing here, instead of, as a leader, in my view, instead of saying, we need to squash this, everybody get over yourselves, instead, let's unite these bases of information. Let's start in as much of a de-escalated zone as we possibly can to try to make sure that we all share the right information. And then we work together to decide what we should all be passionate about together. And so that's kind of the basic format, but essentially it's kind of the opposite advice of a lot of people who say keep the people apart, try to separate them. Instead, it's really about bringing people together and speaking things out. But as a leader, also being the referee to make sure that people are kind and that it doesn't become a painful situation for either of the employees.
So let me see if I understood, because your recipe talks about conflict resolution by isolating, understanding, and resolving. And you say actually the opposite. You say don't isolate the people, put them together and let them speak. So I missed
Yeah,
something.
so let me just state it a little bit differently. We isolate the ideas. So when somebody brings an issue to me, let me give an example of we had a team that was working abroad that was on an engineering team, and we had the product manager who was working side by side with me, and the product manager was incredibly frustrated. She just couldn't get certain things done. And so the first step was, what are the ideas and all the facts that you're bringing to the table here? And so we talked about that. And then I met with the engineering leader abroad, and we had the same conversation. What are the facts that we're bringing to the table, and therefore, why have you gotten that? Then the resolution comes from having the conversation about those facts. So when we come together and have the conversation about those facts, we then see, are we understanding ourselves with the same basic facts? And if somebody is not, they're saying, well, that fact that you're sharing is untrue. Let me give an example. The contract that the team abroad was given had a certain delivery time frame, which caused them to rush and move quickly. And so the product manager was saying that we don't have that delivery time frame concern. Well, okay, we understand now that there are these two different facts. So my recommendation is for each leader, each individual, to then come away and say, how do I lead with this new set of facts? Because the product manager can't change the contract that she has with the engineering team. What she can do is change her expectation and hopefully change the expectation of the engineering manager. What's really important is not for any person to be forced to continue to work with someone that they have conflict with without appropriately working through it without the help of a referee.
And so if I understand you right, you say, let's isolate the problem. Let's understand the data and the facts before putting our emotions into it, and then try to resolve it. But I want to challenge you and ask you, what do you do with the emotions? Because when people are in conflict, they're passionate about their solution, and they're really attached to their solution. And there's a lot of emotions going there, right? Anger, frustration, passion, excitement, whatever. So
yeah, it's a really natural human behavior, and I don't think that we should try to pretend that we're automatons, right? I think that we are all full of passion, and for me personally, the best way for me to get on and move to a next thing is to actually express that passion and that emotion. And so I like to think of myself as a leader who encourages that from the people working for me, that they feel that they can be emotional and that they can share what they're dealing with, as long as the intention is that we're sharing that emotion and that passion in order to keep moving together. That emotion and passion works better if it comes out to me than if it comes out in that frustrating meeting with the other person. The other point that I think is important is that I like to actually teach people how to have a fact-based conversation before having the fact-based conversation. So an example that I like to use, when I sit people down, I'll say, I'm going to take a position that's exactly the opposite of yours on a subject that has nothing to do with work. So we're just going to make up a political topic or a pop culture topic. Let's say I don't like Taylor Swift or something, like everybody loves her. And I'm just going to state my opinion very forcefully and very passionately. And your job is to understand why I believe that. And so what you need to do is you need to come to me and ask me questions that can't be answered with "you idiot" or "how dare you," or have any kind of accusatory, just simply objective fact. And that's a skill that a lot of us don't ever learn. We're taught to advocate for ourselves, but we're not taught to understand the other person. I work hard to teach that skill before we have those conversations. I try to be the one asking the question when we have two people together in a meeting. But sometimes they want to know, and they want to know right now exactly why did you do that, you idiot? And there's a better way to ask that. And so I try to referee and get them back to the stage that they had learned before the meeting.
So I love it because what you're saying actually it's having the ability to nourish curiosity and to
Yes,
really enable a open-minded conversation and try to connect to the broader picture and really try deeply to understand what motivates the other person, what is his values, and what is important for what is the process that got him to this conclusion. And by unfolding the process and understanding the person that in front of me, I can find a place that I can connect with them. And maybe from this deep connection, we can find a new path forward instead of being attached to the different paths that create this conflict, right? Am I right?
absolutely. The first time I got to test this, I volunteer as a ski patroller in Lake Tahoe in the wintertime. And I've done this since I was young. And there's one guy who works there full time. So I'm there on the weekends because I've got another life, but I love being there. And then there's this other guy who's been there for, I think, 30 years. He's an avalanche forecaster. He's an incredibly smart person, but he is so opinionated. And so I was like 22, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm getting challenged by things. And so he was just yelling at me for having done something wrong. It's just, it's kind of like the firehouse culture. It's not really professional in any way. But I got the opportunity to just sit there and ask him a bunch of questions once I had gotten a little bit of training in this, and just ask him a bunch of questions that weren't accusatory at all. And I learned that I was never going to hang out with him, but I learned that he is deeply passionate about making sure none of us are injured. And that's something that he's seen personally. He's lost coworkers. He has a coworker who's lost his limb. And he's responsible for avalanches, which are the most deadly thing that we face, really, that and the bombs that we use to mitigate them. And so he's so passionate that he's willing to, fry a interpersonal relationship in order to save that person. And so now that I understand that, it all makes sense to me. And so I might give him a little nudge in a certain direction, but we have a really strong affinity to each other, even though we're not best friends.
So it's so crucial what you're saying, because, when I work with leaders and bring the self-awareness and presence and mindfulness piece, and talking about communication, for me, it's a crucial thing to communicate mindfully. What I see that we listen to our colleagues, it can be to our spouse, to our kid, doesn't matter. And we tend to try to solve the problems before really listening to what they need. And I think this is the process, really crucial process that we need to learn today as leaders, as individuals and managers, to really be interested in the other person, to understand what brought them to this solution, to let go of finding the solution, but to creating this space of, as you said, curiosity, really listening, really knowing to ask the questions in order to really deeply understand the root of what caused this person or manager or employee to make this decision. And once we will be able to understand the different component that brought him to make this decision, we can change the way we eat things and the solution, right? Because maybe it's not the right solution. So, and it's really, I think, a challenging process to unfold the need to find the solution, because you know why I think we do it? Because we don't feel comfortable not knowing the answer. Maybe it arises, right? What do you think about it? Unpleasant feelings, maybe anxiety. They will see that I'm vulnerable, I'm the leader, I need to have the answers, but I don't really have the answers. So let's try to fix it without having all the data. What do you think about it as a leader of your own company and from your experience?
I think there's a lot of different ways that we get triggered to do the same thing. We get triggered to have an answer when we don't think that we have the answers or the solutions or all the information, because that would undermine us as leaders. We also get triggered by these things because our familial environments, and maybe that they were highly contentious and that made us very uncomfortable. And so we'll do everything and anything in our power to make sure that those don't come out into our lives. And I think there's another way of kind of looking for solutions and moving forward, which is that if we pretend the problem doesn't exist, then it's resolved, and which is another coping mechanism that a lot of us bring over from our childhood. And so I think that what we have to be comfortable with is a really eager and genuine desire to know somebody who is coming back at us with their own emotional outburst. And what I find my responsibility as a leader to do is to coach both people into that position, so that we're not just asking superstar employee to do the superstar work of dealing with the difficult employee so that the superstar can really understand and move on and move better, because we have that expectation for that perfect child, and instead that we have that expectation for everyone who works in this business, and that all of us are professional and seeking an objective goal that we all share, and that we're passionate together and respectful of each other.
You said something that resonated with me. You said one of the way to deal with it is by denial of the problem, right? Accepting it will go away, but actually it will, at the end of the road, it will make much more suffer, right? Because it will explode at the end of the day. If we don't deal with the problem and try to sugarcoating it and not touching the uncomfortable feelings and what it arises, it will increase. At the end of the day, it will be like a volcano that all of us will suffer. So I think this is actually the ability to be courageous enough to accept reality and say, okay, there's a problem here. We don't agree about it. There's a conflict. I see it. And not being attached to my solution without acknowledging what's happening. So this is being present and really mindful. And then having the courage to deal with it and to have this hard conversation, right? To be in a conflict and to enable a space to find the right solution to emerge. And from my experience, I learned that if sometimes when we are so stressed out, we don't give time for the right solution to emerge, and we force the solution and the reality and the situation, and this is not a good solution, right? So if we as leaders can enable the time and space, and in advance, when we are getting to this hard conversation or meeting, talking it out loudly and saying, okay, maybe we won't get to the solution in this meeting, and that's okay. Let's start unfolding the problem. Let's start looking at the problem and talking about it. And maybe we need another meeting for finding the solution. And only by creating this space and legitimation that it's okay that we won't have the solution at the end of the meeting, in a paradoxical way, maybe the solution will emerge even quicker, right? Because we are not stressed out to find the solution. From your experience, as a leader in your company, how do you nourish this open and transparent communication in your company? What do you do, and what do you offer other leaders to do in their own companies from your experience?
Yeah, so what's really interesting about how we do our job, my company is still quite small, and we work directly with private equity firms and the portfolio companies within them to help them keep their cloud costs down and actually reduce them quite significantly. That helps private equity firms have a return on their investment faster. But what that means really is that there is an incredible leader or couple at each of these companies who have done a phenomenal job up until this point, making their software environments rock solid, stable. They don't get woken up in the middle of the night. Their customers have a great experience. Everything's running smoothly. And when we get brought in, it starts to feel like, well, are you telling me I did a bad job? Why did you acquire this company if I was doing a bad job? Are you telling me that I can't solve the problem? And so really what I do a lot of now is kind of trying to coach the other person into having that kind of conversation with me. And so it's really challenging to do that. But one of the tips that I've made is I've kind of established a triangle of a relationship, even when they're talking just with me. And that relationship is your company, my company, and the firm that owns you. And the firm that owns you is being very clear. They've given me direction and they've given you direction. It's the same direction. So knowing that, now teach me what you've got going on over here. And then I'll teach you what we've got going on over here and what we've learned and what we've experienced. And then let's come up with a solution that's unique for the two of us. The really big challenge in our case is something that you just mentioned before, which is time. And we have deliverables and expectations, and we have to get there for the firm immediately. And so that can be really, really challenging. But I spend a lot of my time not necessarily doing the work of cloud cost analysis, but rather doing the work of educating people about what's new about when you're owned by private equity and how that's different than venture capital, educating them about the turnaround that might be expected, how their expenses affect the business, how they affect the financial statements, all these things that you never really learn when you say, I'm going to go start a company and we're going to get some investment. It's just a really different experience at that point. Yeah, the biggest challenge for me is to translate that into a peer conversation and to make sure that I'm not threatening and helping that person get through the relationship with me.
Can you give an example of a conflict that you had and how you approached it and what were the results?
Yeah. So we had this company that was being taken off the public markets, and they were being bought by a private equity firm. And we were involved in the diligence process, but it was after the deal closed. Sometimes that happens, especially when you're taking a company off the public markets, because you don't have as much time and everything is in the open. But once they're privately owned, nobody can see. And it's not that that means diligence needs to be done in the isolation, but rather it gives the private equity firm an opportunity to say, now what are we going to do that's unique? And this amazing man was in charge of their cloud infrastructure environment. And he'd been told for years, we're spending too much and we need your help to control it. And so he had constructed these elaborate monthly reviews where he, piece by piece, went through all the spending and explained why it was what it was differently from the month before, and all the things that they had done to save over time, so that their aggregate savings from the beginning that they had done was X. However, there's this truism about cloud costs is that they just go up. And so, despite being shown these huge numbers, a lot of the executives and definitely the new investors felt that that was false. And that not only that, even if it was true, it just didn't matter, because what happened before is not what's happening in the future. And so we were brought in, and we were given, I think, 2 years worth of these documents plus all the research documents underneath, and told, I don't need you. You don't need to get access to our environments. I just need you to explain this to them. And it's really hard to say that's exactly not what we were brought into, because usually when you get hired at a company, the company says, we want to work with you. In this case, he said, get out of my business. I don't want to work with you. And it got to a point where it got escalated. It was escalated. Oh, maybe we're not secure enough. Maybe we don't know their business enough. Maybe we don't. So we went through all of these security questionnaires and all these things to make sure, okay, now we really know what we're talking about. And then I explained to John, and I think that he probably understood as well, that my job was actually to illuminate things that he already knew. Because on top of all the things that were in his report, he had this list of all these other things he would love to do, but he had no authority in order to ask them to be done in the rest of the company. Because he was the guy in charge of the bill. He wasn't the guy in charge of the quality of the code and the quality of the strategy of the engineering. So not only did we compare notes before we did our report and said, hey, look, what do you have that you wanted to do? Is this the same that we wanted to do? Great. Now we have a number of exactly what you can save if you do that. And here's the instructions and the things that you can share. And we made a point that when we did present, we said, this is an item that came from your team. This is something that your team knew, your team was aware of, and now here are all the tools that we can get them to shine and go further. I've been in a few companies where that person who was reticent gets fired because of that behavior. And I was glad to see that he wasn't, because he really rose to the occasion in the end, and he was able to claim success from having worked with us instead of claiming failure. And I think that really was my goal in the first place, and I'm glad we got there.
So it's interesting, when I listened to you, it felt like there was lack of trust between you at the beginning. So actually you needed to build this trust, right? And the trust is a crucial element nowadays in our companies, right? In engaging the people and making them come on board and be engaged. So what do you do in order to build the trust within your company, or from your experience in other companies that you worked within?
Yeah, I try to be as transparent as possible. Somebody says I'm leaving the company, and the leader's response is, okay, don't tell anyone. We have to figure out how to explain this. Or they review at the board meeting all the financial statements, and it's, confidential, don't share, nobody can see this. I really think that when there's nothing that you're working hard to hide, then you have the opportunity to establish communication and conversations on subjects that are really broad and varying, and whatever makes the opportunity to establish a relationship between you and the other person. So I try to be radically transparent in how we run our business. A second piece to that is to allow people to have a personal life. And so that might be that their schedule is a little different. One person's schedule is a little different than another's. It might be that they take time off and they share why they're taking time off for certain religious events or, familial things or cultural things. A lot of it has to do with giving people the opportunity to feel comfortable sharing all those things. And then the other piece to making sure that happens is that everybody does have different things. If we all have the same pattern of behavior, if we all play the same sports, if we all have kids the same age, if we all have the same religion, if we all have the same background culture, if we all have the same, all of these things, then one person coming in, even if we're a bright, open, and honest conversation and community, that person will feel different, and therefore they won't have that same trust with us. So, it just starts with hiring. It starts and it ends with hiring.
So you're talking about hiring and having a diverse culture, right? Different people. Mm-hmm. And what I hear again, another thing that you're saying, it's seeing the complete person, inviting them to be full person in the workplace and to bring their different flavors and to dare to be authentic, and it's okay to have different leisure time and different religion and different perspective, and it circles back to the conflict resolution, right? So it feels like in the basic you're creating a structure that invite different voices and nourish it. And then people feel, right? What do you think about it?
Yes, it can be incredibly challenging, though. I mean, it's easy when you're starting. And so I'm coming from a position where I've started a business, I've been very thoughtful about it, and I am working to create that environment. In my previous life, when we were in, eight or so different roll-ups, we were from all over the world. And each culture had its own very specific, and in the comparison to the rest of it, very specific limited culture. So while on paper and in numbers, we were quite a diverse workforce, we had the culture of this office and the culture of that office and the culture of that office. And these things got confusing. We came together and one office, we had a convention almost, and one office got really drunk and the other office was going, oh my Lord, what is happening here? And so the challenge then is to really purposefully pull out what makes you unique that is not those subcultures. And so to try to create a guiding star of what is the ethos of being an employee at this company? What do we value, and how do we behave, and how do we determine what to do next in a way that isn't what we've always done and the inertia of the previous company that all likes each other and does all work together. And over time, it takes a lot of effort. And I mean, God bless Danielle, who I worked with, who was head of people, who just spent all her time on breaking down those barriers and did incredible work. So
what did you do practically in the day-to-day to take down these barriers? Do you remember?
What we did in a small way within my team is we created cohorts that were across brands. So each physical location really represented a previous company, and so they represented a brand that continued. And some brands were given more funding and some brands were given less. And so that was a real challenge because there was a lot of defensiveness around the brand. Mm-hmm. And so what we tried to do was focus on specific functionality. So we'd bring together people across brands to work on a specific piece of functionality. And so from a work perspective, we could make sure that people were coming together with really broad ideas. Because the other thing was, if we didn't have those broad ideas about how each brand worked, we wouldn't be able to come up with solutions for functionality that were supposed to be shared that actually would work with all of those. And so the desire that I asked of each teammate in that time was to represent their own selves and represent not only themselves, but what had come before, not as a way to say I'm better, but to say, I'm advocating for making sure this feature works with mine, and I'm expecting you to advocate to make sure this feature works with yours. And we're going to work together to do that, knowing that's the mandate we were all given. And so that was what was most effective for my team. Each team handled it quite differently.
So again, it circles back to communication, right? You took people together and invited them to advocate for their perspective, and also to connect to the broader perspective, right? And seeing the bigger picture. And from this, holding the tension between the local and the global and between the different sites, you can create new solutions. And again, it's the key for all of this is communication, right? It's the ability to really be present, really to let go of our attachment to our solution, to respect other perspectives, and it really enable a space for a new solution to emerge. Otherwise, we won't be able. And as you're saying, it's challenging. It can be messy, right? People are coming with emotions, stress, really passionate, but it can be messy. We need to understand that sometimes it's okay to go through this messiness and to not control all my anger. Like if I'm in a really conflict resolution right now and I'm really passionate about what I'm doing, it's okay that it will be a little emotional. We need to accept it and to understand that it's not against us. As you say, to see the other person, the value that he holds that make him so passionate about it, and to try to go forward with this. So I think it's really, our conversation was around communication and conflict resolution, because I also find in my 20 years of experience working with leaders and business owners and managers that communication is a key. I think the product can be great and the service, but if the communication, we're lacking these skills, the company can fail. So this is my perspective. Kelly, I really enjoyed our conversation, but before we wrap up, do you have anything that you want to share with our listeners that I didn't ask you?
I think the last piece just is that we have to remember the impact of popular culture. Popular culture tells us that when we are buying another company, we won. Popular culture tells us that bosses are always in control. Popular culture tells us a lot of these things that are written by people who never even had a job in the workforce. And so I think that we just always have to remember, like, what you've been told or what you grew up thinking may not be actually true. And so just remember that.
I love it. Like be present and really reflect about what you're hearing, right? About the stories that you're telling yourself or other people. And as you said, ask questions, ask yourself questions, and dare to ask your boss and your colleagues questions. And it's okay not to know the answer. I think this is a crucial thing that I'm taking from this conversation. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be in the uncertain. From this place, we can really find the accurate and innovative solution for our companies and our clients. Claire, thank you very much for your wisdom and experience. And I'm sure that people want to reach out. Where can they find you on your company?
Sure. My company is Aimably. It's AIMABLY.com. And then my name is Claire, CLAIRE, and you can find me on Medium at Claire Designs. I like to write a lot about my industry and how we can do better.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation. You're invited to subscribe to our podcast in order to know when we upload a new episode, and follow us on social media. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care and bye-bye.